Hey, welcome, firefighters. Good to see you all. I hope you've all been able to take a moment to welcome spring, even though there's snow in some places and frost in another, and everything's kind of weird, but still. And wherever you're watching on whatever platform, drop your name and where you're from, where you're joining from in the comments. I love hearing from you, and it really helps us to know who you are and where you're from. And to those of you joining for the first time, welcome to the Fire Drill Fridays family, where we're building community, learning about the climate crisis, and taking action to address it. You can see lots of ways to take action and get involved at firedrillfridays.com/takeaction. And each of you can help our movement grow by starting today's show. So you're sharing today's show so your friends and colleagues can join the movement. So what you should do is hit the share button each time that you spread the message and take action online and offline. Our movement gets stronger. We got a lot to talk about today, from the connection between fossil fuels and the devastating war in Ukraine to celebrating the 52nd Earth Day. We're also going to feature a new special segment to announce the launch of a campaign push to get more climate leaders in office, so be sure to watch until the end. But first, let's have some good news, shall we? Starbucks announced plans to eliminate its single-use cups and encourage consumers globally to adopt reusable mugs. This is a massive move in the right direction. You know, the multinational company acknowledges that its iconic cups are symbolic of a throwaway society that contributes to the problem of plastic pollution. Each year, up to 7 billion of its cups are discarded, accounting for 20% of its global waste impact. So this move is really great. Bravo, Starbucks. And as we move to the second quarter of this year, I want to remind everyone that our 2022 goal of getting Biden to declare a climate emergency, that is our goal this year. And as firefighters know, while we cover a big range of topics and various ways of addressing the climate crisis on this show, they all connect back to our big picture goal. We need the president to hear us loud and clear. The time to act is now. If you want more details, check out February's episode, where we explain our strategy and why declaring a climate emergency is so important. With Putin's war in Ukraine fueled by fossil fuels, action here at home is more urgent than ever. In New York City a couple of weeks ago, 2 Greenpeace boats protested the arrival of a 50,000-ton oil tanker carrying an estimated $34 million worth of Russian fossil fuel products. Products like these are financing Putin's invasion of Ukraine. Greenpeace activists made sure that people knew about it, that this didn't stay quiet. They met the ship and they held up signs that read, "Oil Fuels War." Greenpeace's USA's climate campaign director, Anusha Narayanan, said it perfectly, and I quote, "The history of oil is war. The oil and gas companies that are responsible for our skyrocketing gas prices are the same companies that are fueling conflicts and death around the globe. A more peaceful, livable, and equal future depends on breaking our addiction to volatile and conflict-driven fossil fuels. This is a moment where we need to accelerate the transition to renewable energy and end our dependence on poisonous fossil fuels that are killing us and undermining democracy," unquote. You can find out more about this action and others on our Take Action page, firedrillfridays.com/takeaction. You know, every day we see the movement for a clean and peaceful future growing stronger. Around the world, people are taking action and demanding climate justice and an end to wars. On today's show, in honor of this year's Earth Day later in the month, we're going to be celebrating two incredible youth activists and talking about Earth Day, what Earth Day means to them and to this younger generation. It was 1970 when Senator Gaylord Nelson, inspired by the protests and anti-war teach-ins of the 1960s, launched the first Earth Day. It began as a national teach-in on the environment, and it was held on April 22nd to maximize the number of students who could get involved. It was a massive success. 20 million people participated in that first Earth Day and its events. According to the Environmental Protection Agency, that first Earth Day resulted in a permanent change in national priorities. The percentage of the public who felt that protecting the environment was an important goal increased by 2,500% that year after the first Earth Day. Wow. Now, obviously, a lot has changed since the 1970s. The amount of people who are concerned and want action on the environment continues to increase. And here to talk about their journeys and today's environmental movement are two incredible young women. Bonnie Wright is an actress, filmmaker, and advocate for climate justice and the protection of our environment. She began her career playing Ginny Weasley in the Harry Potter films, and now uses her platform to amplify the importance of environmental health. Since 2017, she's been an ambassador for Greenpeace, focusing on single-use plastic pollution in our oceans and the connection to the fossil fuel and petrochemical industry. Bonnie was born in London and now lives by the Pacific Ocean in California. Now, Leah Thomas is a celebrated environmentalist who coined the term eco-communicator to describe her style of environmental activism. Leah uses her passion for writing and creativity to explore and advocate for the critical yet often overlooked relationship between social justice and environmentalism. She founded and launched Intersectional Environmentalist in 2020. It's a resource hub and platform that aims to advocate for environmental justice. Leah is also the founder of the Eco Lifestyle blog at Green Girl Leah. Check it out. Welcome to you both, and thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, thanks so much for having us.
Hi.
Lovely to be here.
So glad to see you. I'd love to hear from each of you what first inspired you to get involved and start fighting for environmental justice. Leah, let's start with you.
Yeah, I think it was kind of a roundabout way where it was social justice first and then environmentalism. I'm from St. Louis, Missouri originally, and I grew up in a small town right outside of Ferguson, Missouri. So when I was studying environmental science in school, all the way in California, unfortunately, that's when kind of the uprising surrounding Ferguson and the start of the Black Lives Matter movement happened. So during my studies, I was really focusing on getting involved in social justice. And then I said, wait, I really don't have to separate these things because the same communities that are experiencing social injustice are also experiencing environmental injustice. So maybe if I could focus on environmental human rights, like everyone having clean air, clean water, etc., maybe there would be less social injustices as well. So that's what really got me involved, just studying, and then the climate of the world being so focused on social justice.
Beautifully said. Thank you, Leah. And you, Bonnie?
Yeah, for me, as you mentioned, my main topic and kind of way into the kind of climate crisis was ocean health and single-use plastics. And through my kind of experience working with Greenpeace and sort of getting that kind of, that fire in you to want to sort of like make change and understand why systems were broken, that all this single-use plastic was ending up in our oceans. And it made me, after realizing my own privilege to have the access to a lot of this kind of education and information, and also realizing there was no one way to solve this issue because everyone is coming from a very, very uniquely different perspective. So one can't just say, let's eradicate single-use plastic bottles, because a lot of people rely on that being the only way they can get clean drinking water. So just seeing the nuance of how, environmental justice comes into these issues so that there is no one blanket way to address the crisis, and taking people into account was really how environmental justice really began to make sense to me.
Beautifully said. I guess that recently it was discovered that microplastic particles are in human blood now.
Yeah. and how there's no control over that, how that enters into your systems.
Leah, can you explain what intersectional environmentalism means?
I will. It's definitely a mouthful. It's like too many syllables. But people have been saying the exact same thing for many, many decades. So whether we say climate justice, environmental injustice, even ecofeminism, I feel like is a part of intersectional environmentalism. But to me, it really just means prioritizing the protection of both people and the planet, and realizing the ways that the most marginalized communities in the world, the way that they're treated really closely resembles the way that the earth is treated. So if we disregard human life, and we're also disregarding the safety and the health of the environment, that's because of a lot of extractive systems that are at play. And then one of the other important things to intersectional environmentalism is making sure to highlight and uplift diverse perspectives around the world that are also fighting to save the planet.
My friend, the environmentalist Hop Hopkins, he said, if there was no racism, there'd be no climate crisis. I'm sure you agree with that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Bonnie, a lot's changed since the first Earth Day in 1970. What does Earth Day mean to you, and what do you think it means to your generation?
Yeah, I think I always think I have these kind of love-hate relationships with these big days. I think what's important, and I think as people struggle with them, as things are so beautifully put on social media, but sometimes it can be kind of overwhelming as we all kind of have our own relationship to Earth Day or to the climate movement. I think my thing I always try and remind myself on a day like Earth Day is that we can all have our own kind of relationship to it. Just because maybe we're seeing what other people are doing online doesn't mean that we necessarily have to do what other people are doing. And we can have our own relationship to it. And it could be as simple as kind of noticing, a weed grow through a sidewalk, or taking your shoes off and standing in the dirt. It doesn't have to be these kind of romantic ideas, I think, of our connection to nature sometimes, because even within that, our own access to nature can be massively, a big spectrum. So I always think with Earth Day, I like to see it as my own kind of celebration of my relationship to the earth, rather than necessarily comparing my relationship to other people. And I think that really helps us to feel invigorated with our work, advocating for the protection of people and the planet, because it makes you just kind of slow down and deprogram these kind of ways of being busy, I think, and just really reconnecting to why we're doing this work, and kind of bring that love back through. I think, there's so much happening right now that can be very scary and sad and overwhelming. So I think for me, trying to cultivate some love on Earth Day is always something that I try and do personally.
Oh, that's so beautiful. I couldn't agree more with you. And just the fact that you've said that, I know exactly what I'm going to do on Earth Day. I'm going to do one of the things that I love the most. I'm going to go for a walk in a forest.
Yeah, perfect.
I love being in a forest now, especially now that I know that trees communicate and heal and help each other and warn each other. I mean, it's like a living, it's a living ecosystem that begins with the mycelium underground and the mushrooms and the fungi. and then the trees that grow, and really stand in a forest and feel the awareness through my feet of the beauty of the living organisms. And thank you for that. You've just motivated me to know what I'm going to do. How is each of you dealing with the thinking about the world's converging crises of inequality and climate chaos and war?
That's a good question. That's a big question. I think I definitely struggle with anxiety, as I'm sure most people do, especially during 2020. I had never personally had so many crises happening at the same time. So the pandemic, and then we're also having arguably the biggest civil rights movement of my time, the Black Lives Matter movement, also Stop Asian Hate and immigration and the climate crisis. And at times it felt really overwhelming. But that's why I think leaning into the power of community has really helped me, by realizing like, okay, a community is kind of like a circle, and each of us can play our own unique role. We don't have to be anyone that we're not, and lean into those strengths. And then, maybe I'll tackle this environmental justice issue with this group of people, and this person is also working on plastics and things like that. And I think understanding that as a community, we make this really amazing circle, and that it's not just us against the world, is the only way I've been able to deal with it and kind of break some of those things apart, because it is, it's really overwhelming. The world is, a scary place sometimes.
You want to add anything to that, Bonnie?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree. Community, just leaning on people and friends. I think sometimes, just how immediately better you feel by having a conversation with someone, whether that's, not even maybe in person because of everything that's been happening. And I think too that, dealing with or like feeling better or having the tools to feel better, sometimes none of those tools work, and it's okay to like, have a bad day or not deal with it, kind of, so to speak, because it's what have we had in training of our life to like prepare us for these moments.
Yeah. Talking about these crises and their interconnections just in itself is one of the best things we can do. Talking about them and their connections. Among your many talents, you've each written books about environmentalism. Bonnie, tell us about your book, which is called Go Gently. I like that. Actionable Steps to Nurture Yourself and the Planet. What led you to write it, and what are you hoping to convey?
Yeah, thanks. I guess what led me to write it was, I felt like had all these more sort of global or more public actions that I was taking, whether that was with Greenpeace campaigning for ocean health, whether that was going to marches, rallies, these kind of more sort of alive moments where you kind of feel like, something's happening and something's changing. And I would come home and I would find it quite hard to kind of keep that energy up in my home practices, or I would come home and see, different habits or things I was doing in my home didn't quite kind of connect to the issues I was kind of advocating for. So I was interested in just how could I cultivate more at-home practices that felt more in line with these issues, such as ocean health or soil health. And so I started in my own curiosities of just cultivating practice to be more resourceful with what I had, whether that was kind of tending and mending to the items I did have, whether that was being more involved with what was in season and what was growing. And I realized that a lot of these practices, well, maybe the most interesting part of kind of taking part with the climate movement, and I shared them in the form of a book, because I found just practicing and sitting down to write a book was a very challenging and amazing thing. When we spend so much of our time sharing things on social media, I was really interested in kind of shifting to that medium of the book that was more tangible. So the book is very much about how there's no right or wrong way to show up to these issues. There's so many more nuances within that, hence the kind of Go Gently title, this idea that there's no perfect way to show up and implement changes in your life, because we're all so different. So yeah, it's hard to explain and put it in a nutshell, but it's a very practical kind of handbook with lots of recipes and things to implement in your life.
Yeah. Recipes? Food recipes?
There's a whole food chapter. There's 9 chapters. One's about food. One's about kind of homemade products. One's about keeping and mending and tending to your things. One's all about finding community. And then the first chapter is all about kind of the systems at play within the climate crisis, the kind of big picture of just looking at what's happening and how do these relate to our lives. You know, these things can feel so big and large, but how do we bring that down to a scale that like relates to our day-to-day life?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have been made to become so much more aware of the role that shopping plays, you know, this consumerism and the things we buy, and that we're not really aware of the damage to the environment that the things we buy cause and all of that. Yeah, there's so much learning to be done. Thank you. I can't wait to read it. It's out now, yes?
It's out in 3 weeks' time.
In
yes.
3 weeks' time.
On the 19th of April. It's with HarperCollins. Yeah.
HarperCollins. Okay. Great.
Yeah.
And Leah, I'd love to hear the same from you about your new book, which is called The Intersectional Environmentalist: How to Dismantle Systems of Oppression and to Protect People and the Planet. Wow. What led you to write it, and how do you hope it'll spur people to action?
Yeah, well, I was smiling because I'm super excited about Bonnie's book as well. We were writing them at the same time, so I'm just super stoked for that. But yeah, I started writing my book as I was founding my nonprofit, Intersectional Environmentalist, and it was really to answer the kind of hundreds of thousands of people who suddenly said, like, hey, Leah, what is intersectional environmentalism? How can I incorporate this into my curriculum or share this with my teachers or implement this into my like government agency or whatever it is? And I really needed to expand beyond the one definition that I happened to post on social media one day that I had no idea that people would be so interested in. But how cool that there was a call from these people, hundreds of thousands of people who said they wanted to learn about environmental justice and they wanted to learn now. So I kind of wrote a primer introductory text, kind of the textbook that I wanted as a young Black environmental science student, that talked about intersectional theory and Black feminist theory, but then also explores things like ecofeminism from very diverse perspectives of Indigenous women and women of color around the world. And then also talks about the history of the environmental justice movement, which happened after the Earth Day movement, and why we even needed to have an environmental justice movement that was led by people of color, and what maybe some oversights were during that original Earth Day movement. So I just wanted to introduce people to the world of environmental justice and all things diversity, equity, and inclusion and environmentalism. But it's very much a supplementary text because I talk about things, lots of different things, and I hope this is a starting point for people who are asking that question: what is intersectional environmentalism and why is it 12 syllables? So yeah.
Wow, wonderful. What would you say to young people looking to get involved, but they're not sure how to take the next step? This is really for both of you.
Yeah, sure. Well, I feel, I mean, for instance, the resources that Leah gives on her Instagram and also Intersectional Environmentalist, I think so much can be about following the right people and putting them into your sphere of kind of your world, I think is a great way. I think sometimes just that connectivity and those ideas and being seen by other people through the work that they do. I think a lot of people have felt unseen, whether that's by their government, whether that's by society. And I feel like I'm sure for a lot of people who follow platforms like yours, Leah, they feel more kind of seen and understood in a way that's current, when a lot of this material that's existed maybe around the environment has felt a little bit kind of antiquated maybe. So I think putting different organizations in your sphere, and I think we've touched on it, but really community, I think, is the most amazing way to find like-minded people, whether that's in-person events, whether that's still online events, whether that's as simple as kind of typing in your town and finding a local Greenpeace chapter of that town, and that being maybe the first stepping stone to like finding some friends within the movement. I honestly think that's like the way that kind of brings hope and allows you to keep going. So I'd say, yeah, finding a community is a great way, because then you're just sharing resources immediately.
Yeah. And the community part also, when you're down, when you're depressed, can lift you up, right? I
Yeah.
feel so buoyed by my community of climate activists. I'm so grateful to them. How do you answer that question, Leah?
Yeah, I definitely would agree. And then also just really stressing to find what you're honestly really good at. I remember a mentor of mine told me every movement needs an accountant. And that's something that I often didn't think about. There are people who are really good at numbers, they're really good at Excel spreadsheets, and you can lend that to the cause that you care about. And then being honest with yourself. And for me, I can be a bit reserved at times. So that's why I lean into digital media and writing and things that I can do kind of, with the barrier of a computer screen. I don't have to be the person that's holding the microphone. But I also know some incredible friends that were in theater, and they would gladly take that microphone and lead the front of the protest, and kind of just leaning into your special skills and knowing that, okay, I can be myself and show up for the movements that I care about. And then, like Bonnie said earlier, I think the way that I found a lot of things in my local area, so Santa Barbara and Ventura, is doing a Google search of environmental justice organizations in Ventura or Santa Barbara. And then I found them. And then I found all of these environmental issues that were happening just down the street from my house that I had no idea about. And I was able to show up for those protests, follow them on social media. And the thing is, you don't have to, these organizations, they are often the bearer of their own solutions. So you don't have to come into these spaces as a savior. They usually have solutions, but they just need amplification and support and resources, etc. So asking people what they need and not assuming what they need, and then joining that local movement in your community.
One of the organizations that I discovered in your area in Santa Barbara that I really respect is the Environmental Defense Center.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're super great.
They're
There's
really
so much. Yeah, the environmental history in Santa Barbara is so cool with Earth Day and
yes.
everything, and yeah.
Especially since the drills out in the ocean had their leak in the 70s. People really have risen up. Yeah.
Yeah.
What gives each of you hope?
Oh, that's a good question.
Start with you, Leah.
It's actually a question I ask. Leah's interviewed in my book, and there's about 14 people interviewed in my book, and that's one question I asked, that like, what instills hope in you? Well, I think what instills hope in me is my ability to have like conversations with people I never would have had conversations with. I think often I feel like I can have a love-hate relationship with progress, technology, social media, but when I really sit down to think of the conversations I can have, like that gives me so much hope, because I'll learn something in this hour that I wouldn't have learned otherwise if we didn't get to connect this way. So I just feel so hopeful for the connections that I'm yet to have, and will keep coming through my life, and how that can expand my mind, and how, we can rewire and change kind of thought patterns we have in our head that kind of mirror systems that exist in this world that really need deconstructing and rewriting. And I think just in my own mind, how that shifts and changes, it makes me hopeful that systems that still oppress people can be intersected with new ideas and new systems. So yeah, that kind of just chemical shifting that's happening in my own mind, I feel like I hope that, and feel hopeful that can happen with systems too.
Beautiful, beautiful. What about you, Leah?
This is a good question. And Bonnie, I'm curious how I answered it in your book. I'll have to go back. It may have changed. But I think what gives me hope is educational systems, because in the last 2 years, just there's been so many teachers, whether they're elementary schools, middle schools, high schools, university professors, that have updated their curriculums really quickly. So when they started to learn about intersectional environmentalism and the need to not separate environmental justice way over here and conservation way over here, and to just teach environmentalism through an intersectional lens that embraces diversity, how that can also lead to students who are learning that proposing more comprehensive solutions. And then just seeing educators say, oh, I showed this film that was recommended on your website in my class, or I updated my curriculum to make sure that we have an Indigenous environmental justice advocate come speak to our students. Little things like that, that really adds up. And I think one story that I have to share, I went to Chapman University in Orange County, and in our environmental program, we didn't have a mandatory environmental justice class, but there were students. One of them was an intern of mine who decided to kind of start protesting and ask for a class to be added. And with that, within a couple of months, they added the first Indigenous environmental justice professor to Chapman University, and they updated their curriculum within a span of a couple of months. So I think that gives me a lot of hope, the power of our educational systems to transform. Policy sometimes moves really slow, but I think education gets me really excited, because if that changes, then we'll see it start to trickle into policy, which we are seeing slowly but surely.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Leah, did you have parents that encouraged your ability to be so empathic and I don't know what the word is, to other people's, you're both very welcoming to diversity and to other people's differences. You know, you've both in different ways said everybody will come at this issue from their own place in different ways, and that's okay. So I'm just curious, Leah, did your parents encourage that in you?
I would say, so my mom is a therapist and my dad is a tennis coach. So I think there's something about that maybe with my mom just being, you know, everybody has a story, everybody has trauma, everyone has happiness, like just be nice to people. And I also grew up in the Midwest, and I think people tend to be a bit nicer in the Midwest, in my opinion. But yeah, I think it was that made me really open. And I think just existing in a lot of different diverse spaces, St. Louis is kind of not necessarily intentionally, but racially segregated in some ways still. So you'll kind of still see different communities that are primarily white, primarily Black, primarily Asian, etc. And I grew up in a primarily Black neighborhood, but I went to school in a predominantly white neighborhood. So I think just coexisting in different spaces, and then also having my parents instill that sense of empathy in me really helped.
How about you, Bonnie?
Yeah, I feel, just being like having the space when growing up to feel emotions and not feel like that was not welcome was definitely part of my upbringing. I feel like my parents are like deeply emotive people, and they express themselves, they're designers, jewelry designers, they express themselves and have that vehicle of kind of expression. So I think for me, I was very lucky to feel openly okay that my expression through art, obviously first acting, then kind of directing and different things, was totally welcome. And I make sense of the world through the things I create. Like that's how I kind of grapple with ideas and feelings and emotions. So I feel lucky that that has been able to be my life, that form of kind of expression. So yeah, I definitely grew up in a way that kind of welcomed emotions and welcomed like compassion and empathy to others. I didn't just, whatever was going on in the world, it was always less about facts and more about the people kind of affected by that, whether that's, right now thinking of war and oppression that's happening in this world. Like, while yes, one talks about the politics of it, I was always kind of more taught to talk about the people within that story. So yeah.
Before we take audience questions, I just want to say that both of you fill me with hope. I'm so moved by your worldviews and the way you approach your activism. I'm so grateful, and you do give me hope. And now let's take some audience questions.
Yeah, definitely. We have some really good ones rolling in. This question is for both of you, Bonnie and Leah. How will each of you be spending Earth Day? And what would your advice be for me? I have nothing planned. And this is from Lewis on Facebook.
I think I'll be in New York, which will be different. I'm used to being in California for Earth Day. And then I'll be spending the day talking with some different students, which I love. I think that's what just makes me really excited. So I think I'll be speaking to 3 or so schools around New York, and I'm super pumped. But I think also not putting too much pressure on yourselves, like to do something on Earth Day. Usually I love to just get outside during Earth Day, and then I consider all of April Earth Month. So I try to, do different things throughout the month. So yeah, you can kind of experiment with whether you want to observe an Earth Month, an Earth Week, just Earth Day. But if you can, I would say spending some time just connecting with nature outdoors and appreciating all that Mama Earth has to offer on Earth Day is one of the greatest ways to get involved.
Yeah, I would say sort of similar to what Leah said, just to find your own relationship to the earth, whatever that may be, and on that day, as I said kind of before. If that's not going outside and that's watching kind of a great movie on television, whether that's a documentary or even an animation that kind of brings the world alive, sometimes it's maybe not going outdoors. It could be through your computer, but just really celebrating the elements that you love. And for me on Earth Day, it's the week my book is out. So I think I'll be doing different events around the book. And so I don't know what that might be yet, but I'm sure I'll be celebrating it with hopefully other people around me, whether that's people who are new to the movement or have been in it long before me. I hope to really meet new people that week. That's kind of my aim for Earth Day, to sort of expand my community.
Perfect. Thank you both. The next question is from David on Facebook, and this one is for you, Bonnie. Bonnie, can you talk a little bit more about the work that you've done with Greenpeace on and off their ships? What was that like?
Yeah, so back in, I think it was 2017 or 18, I had the privilege of going on the Arctic Sunrise when Greenpeace were going down the Atlantic coast, visiting different coastal communities to bring awareness to different issues that were faced in those different communities down the coastline. And I was on a section that was kind of going through the Gulf of Mexico, and we were trawling for microplastics. And trawling for microplastics is essentially putting a large net into the ocean and seeing what plastics one picks up, whether that's tiny pieces or big pieces of soft plastic, and being part of that kind of data collection that kind of created a bigger picture for kind of the issue. So I've had sort of more specific firsthand things like that with Greenpeace, and then different things from introducing another activist, Kevin J. Patel, at one of Jane's Fire Drill Fridays at LA City Hall, to also just kind of, I've done different things similar to trawling in the not so beautiful blue oceans of the Gulf of Mexico, but in the kind of muddy rivers of England, and how, our rivers connect to our oceans. So yeah, I've had the privilege of doing incredible things at Greenpeace, and I'm always so continuing inspired by the campaigners that I've met who work there, who are just so passionate and so knowledgeable. And every time I spend time with them, I come home feeling very invigorated. And I've also done things with like the local Greenpeace LA chapter, which is kind of what I said before, how you can find your like town or city's chapter often of larger organizations like Greenpeace. So I really loved also just connecting with the kind of smaller group of the LA chapter of Greenpeace.
Thanks, Bonnie. It's always a joy for us to work with you. This question is for you, Leah, and it's from Anna on Instagram about something that you touched on earlier. Anna says, Leah, I could definitely relate when you said you feel anxiety, especially over the last 2 years in particular. Do you mind talking a little bit more about how you cope with those feelings and or how you channel that into your activism?
I would say that it's really important to grant ourselves some compassion because anxiety is a completely normal response to everything that's going on in the world. Even if we're just talking about the climate crisis, we're not talking about the pandemic, that is anxiety inducing as it should be. And then when you compound all of these other things, just grant ourselves some compassion. We've been operating in a really unique world, to say the least. But I think something that I've started to lean into is self-care being a radical act. I didn't know that self-care as a concept was somewhat pioneered by the Black Panthers and other civil rights organizations that found themselves understanding that in order to do this revolutionary work, then we need to make sure that we as individuals are okay and that we as a community are okay. So that made me start rethinking the way that I describe sustainability. Sustainability also includes the ways that I sustain myself and the ways that I sustain my community, my family, my friends, and those sorts of things. And in order to do that, if I'm feeling a lot of anxiety, I need to listen to my body, just like we're encouraging politicians to listen to the earth and make changes there, and take a moment to really care for myself. So sometimes for me, that means being regimented. I know that sounds, it's not the most fun thing in the world, but going to sleep at a certain time if I can, or, listening to my body to go to sleep, making sure that I'm moving my body and getting active, even if that's just a walk around the park or just sitting on my patio, is also a nature experience that makes me a lot happier. So taking the time to do those things to fill your cup is super important when it comes to combating eco-anxiety. And sometimes I have so much perspective. I might wake up feeling stressed and so anxious, and then I go for a drive. I mean, I live in Santa Barbara, so it's a little different. I go for a drive and I come back and I just feel so much better just because I had like an ounce of sunshine on my face. So listen to your body, take care of yourself, and practice community care, because self-care and joy are also radical acts in this world that we live in.
Thank you so much, Leah. This question is for both of you. This is from Anna on Instagram. Bonnie and Leah, are both of your friend groups just as active as you are about climate? I know my friends are super well-intentioned and they care about climate, but they seem a little hesitant to take bigger actions, like going to protests or marches, joining volunteer groups, etc. Do you think I should try to convince them to do those things or just let it be?
That's a good question. I think there's nothing more powerful than not telling someone to do something, but instead living the truth you're doing and the things you enjoy, and that joy that you feel from those actions you're taking will radiate and will ripple out in a way that you may not know, oh, I did this and they did that. It's not sometimes as clear, the cause and effect. But, over time, those like ripples will change and move people to kind of step up to it when they're ready and in a way that they want to. And I think just because they may not be actively doing something out in the open, that doesn't mean to say that they're not maybe doing something, in their own time, in their own way. So I think just kind of continue to do what you're doing. And I think your friends and community will naturally kind of be affected in ways that aren't visually kind of obvious. And it's kind of like a ripple effect. And I think, same with the actions that you do out in the world, whether that's kind of being at the coffee shop with your reusable cup, or that's kind of, shopping in a certain, these kind of consumer things that we do out in the open. We never know what and how that inspires people, but it does, because we are inspired by that kind of social proof idea. Like we will see someone doing something and be like, oh yeah, I forgot my cup today, I'll bring it tomorrow to the coffee store. So you're never going to see that person bring their cup to the coffee store the next day, but it just kind of happens in a way that's like, unseen. So I would just keep living your truth and doing the things you're doing, and people will follow in their own time.
I completely agree. I think when I started studying environmental science, I turned into like an environmental tyrant. It was not cute. I went on this complete like no straws, no nothing, like absolutist environmental take, my freshman and sophomore year. And I realized how much of that was rooted in ego, maybe in some ways, and kind of, maybe being that way, not having compassion because it did something for me personally and not necessarily the cause that I was trying to advance. And I wasn't reaching a lot of people through shame-based motivation. And shame isn't something that, inspires me to act, nor should it need to be something that you're using with your friends and people that you really, really care about. And like Bonnie said, I think leading by example is the most important thing. And sometimes it might take time. But I remember when I was learning about environmental science, and then I went back home to Missouri, and I was just telling my family, like, we can't do this, we can't do this, we can't do that. And they would look at me just kind of like with so much confusion. And looking back on it, I understand that was complete judgment on my part. And when instead I've just been doing things over the last decade or so, my family has naturally started adopting some of those things. And then they'll call me and say, they might not have the same reasoning that I do, but, we save this much money by switching to this. And maybe for them, that's where it starts. It's just something that helps them save money. And then over time, they start to also see, oh, this is something that I'm doing that's good for the environment. Or I know that my dad loves cars. So starting to talk about electric cars and innovation and different cars that he really likes. So I'm not coming into these, close, intimate relationships with shame or talking down to people, but also leading by example and then talking about things that they might be interested. And then if they want to make those changes, they will. And more times than not, if they're your friends, they probably will. If it's something that you care about, then it's something that they might consider caring about too.
Thank you so much, Leah and Bonnie. So this is another question for both of you. This is from Inga on Twitter. Inga says, I really want to ramp up my activism online, but sometimes I feel intimidated. I don't want to say the wrong thing or make a mistake. What's your advice?
I think something just really quickly that I learned with my book, when it was printed, I found like 2 typos in it. We had so many editors, who knows, it's fine. They'll do a reprint. But I remember getting so devastated and dramatic for a couple of days, like, oh no, I tried so hard for years to write the perfect book and inspire people, and there happens to be a word that's written twice. Oh no. And then understanding that the value of this book or whatever communication that I was working on isn't going to be diminished if it's not perfect, because nothing is perfect. No book is perfect. No Instagram post is perfect. No tweet is perfect. So it's okay. And I think if we wait for things to be perfect to act, then we're not going to act at all, because we're all imperfect humans. And, just showing up imperfectly is more than good enough. So write your heart out. You might learn some things along the way. You might post something on social media and people might call you in and say, hey, maybe here's another way that you can think of it. And don't take that as, an attack or anything like that. Be open to feedback, but just show up and act, and then you'll learn along the way.
I want to thank you both for not just for joining me, but I find for both of you that the humanity and empathy and generosity that you bring to climate activism is unusual, maybe, and so important and so moving. And I'm so grateful to have had an opportunity to talk to you both and listen to your answers. This has been just wonderful. Thank you so very much. The youth climate movement is leading the way, that's for sure, and demanding changes to protect their future, and we all need to listen. Thank you. And now we're going to take a moment for a new segment that we're calling the Greenpeace Special Report, where we'll be taking an inside look into on-the-ground campaign work. Today, we'll be featuring Valerie Love from Greenpeace's organizing program to tell us about an exciting new project at Greenpeace.
Thank you, Jane, and hello, Fire Drill Friday fighters. I'm Valerie Love. I help manage Greenpeace USA's organizing program, and I am fiercely passionate about organizing because I know that people power gets the goods. I'm also a mom. I have a 5-year-old daughter and an 8-month-old son, and not a day goes by that I don't think about what kind of world they're going to inherit and how I want to be able to look them in the eye and tell them that I did everything in my power to turn the tides towards a fair, healthy, sustainable world for them to grow up in. I am super excited to be here today because I get to tell you about a new project that Greenpeace USA is launching to build the climate vote in 2022 and in the midterm elections. And I get to tell you how you can join us. So first, why is engaging in the midterm elections so important? We need champions in Congress who will fight for us. And we need to hold politicians accountable who are putting profit over people and the planet. So continuing to show up for elections will prove that our movement cannot be ignored. In the 2016 elections, 10 million people who said that they cared about the climate didn't vote. In 2020, climate voters showed up in record numbers to secure a better future for our communities. Now, we need to keep up the momentum and prove that when everyone who cares about the climate shows up together, we can deliver the green and peaceful future that we all need. So by building the climate vote in this election, we also have the power to end gridlock in Congress by electing climate leaders and removing oil and gas funded cronies from power. So how are we organizing to win? We have identified key races where climate justice candidates are running, and we're organizing a national volunteer-powered letter writing campaign to get voters out to the polls. These letters will have a scorecard that clearly communicates where candidates stand on climate issues, and it will have a personalized, handwritten message urging the importance of voting. Personalized letters have been shown to be one of the most effective tactics in boosting turnout. And scorecard mail has been shown to be very effective in persuasion. Plus, it's fun, it's easy, it's a great way to get involved and make a difference. So win, win, win. We have a goal of collectively writing 50,000 personalized messages, but we need your help to get there. So join us by signing up to write letters together with other Greenpeace volunteers. We'll be holding virtual letter writing parties 3 times a week for the next 8 weeks. Or you can also sign up to write letters on your own time. So you can learn more and join us and sign up now by going to voteclimate2022.org. So again, voteclimate2022.org. This is a make or break moment for our planet. Every vote counts. We cannot do this without you. So let's get to work. Back to you, Jane.
Like Valerie said, personalized letters have been shown to be one of the most effective ways to get voters to the polls. It's fun, it's easy to do, and as you've heard from the many political guests that we've had on Fire Drill Fridays, it really makes a difference. So let's get to writing. You know the drill. To make change, we need to take action. Visit firedrillfridays.com/takeaction and sign up to join the letter writing campaign. That's all the time we have for today. I wish each of you a meaningful Earth Day. However you choose to celebrate, I hope you can each find a moment to breathe deeply and take in some of this gorgeous world that we're fighting to protect. And of course, if anyone wants to know what we want at Fire Drill Fridays in 2022, tell them we need President Biden to declare a national climate emergency today. Have a wonderful month. Be sure to follow our social channels for updates, and we'll see you on the first Friday in May, on May 6th at 11 a.m. Pacific time. See you next time.